You want to use streaming data integration in order to move data from your existing sources that are generating lots of data to targets. But you're trying to work out, is it better for me to build this myself from lots of different components that are available, open source components? Or is it better that I buy a streaming data integration platform and have that do all the work for me? So let's take a look at the differences between building and buying when it comes to streaming data integration platforms. Well, first of all, if you're building it yourself, then you need all of the components that we've mentioned in previous videos that go into making a streaming data integration platform. You need data collectors and data delivery, and within that, it's not just a single thing, right? You need many adapters, because you need adapters that support databases, files, maybe IoT, cloud targets, a whole bunch of different technologies in order to get the data from where it is now to where you want it to be. You need to think about, how am I going to do the data movement? What messaging system do I use? Do I use multiple ways of doing data movement? How am I going to do stream processing? What's the engine for that? How do I define it? Is there a UI? In open source, it's unusual to have a UI for a lot of things. So how do I define the stream processing? Does it support SQL, which in a previous video we mentioned is the best approach really for having people that know data to work with things like streaming data? How do I enrich data? Does the platform include like in-memory data grid or other mechanism by which I can enrich data at high speed? How do I ensure that all of this that I'm building from all these building blocks is enterprise grade, is all scalable together, is reliable together, is secure together? And how do I get insights and alerts and be able to view the data flows and understand what's going on if I'm piecing this together myself? Is that an area that I should put effort into? Because it's essential for kind of a lot of operational reasons. So assume that you are going to try and build this from open source, from lots of different open source pieces. For every piece that goes into making up this platform, including all the framework pieces and all the adapters that you'll need on either end, you need to go through a process. And this process involves designing the overall platform, how do all the pieces fit together, and then for each piece you need to look at what's available, what are the different pieces that are available out there that could do that job, and then evaluate each one, and evaluate them not just on their own, but how do they fit in with the other pieces that you're looking at. Then once you've done that for each piece, you need to try and integrate all the pieces together. And of course, that integration involves building a lot of the glue code on top of the pieces that you've chosen to abstract it so that it is easier for people to work with, but also so that it is enterprise grade, that it scales together, that it's reliable, that it's secure. So assuming that you've built all of this, you can then start to build your application. So you have to do all of this first. Now when it comes to maintaining it, open source isn't always maintained forever. It can go away. People can just choose to stop supporting it. In which case it's deprecated, in which case you now have to go in and identify another piece of open source that can take its place, that will fit in, that you now have to integrate. And of course, even if it's just upgraded, that could mean the APIs have changed or the way that its function has changed. So you're going to have to perform the integration and test everything again in order to make sure that everything's working. And then you're going to have to test your applications on the platform that you've just built again and make sure that's working. If you have any issues in any of that, you need to go to support. Now, some open source platforms have support, some don't. So there may be pieces that you're supporting yourself, or because you've chosen to put multiple things together, there may be multiple vendors, including adapters like change data capture that may come from different vendors than your data movement, different people to call for support. And that can become a headache because different organizations tend to like to blame each other. So you need to have support for all the pieces, and then they may tell you that you need to upgrade, and then you need to reintegrate. And so it can become a big issue to kind of maintain all of this. Now, the difference between doing all of that and using a pre-built SDI solution, something that you would buy, is basically that you're not doing any of these pieces in the middle. You're basically saying, I'm going to replace all those pieces of open source I have to put together myself with an SDI solution that's out of the box. Basically, you'll download the solution and start building your data flows. And so that is going to massively reduce the amount of time that it's going to take for you to start building your data integrations. So when it comes to kind of summarizing all of this, what are the differences between the costs and risks of build versus buy? Now, we went through all the steps that you have to take. Each one of those steps are going to involve engineers. They're going to involve people that understand different technologies. And they're going to have to be a team around that to manage building the platform. So there can be a pretty high development cost. And often that development cost, if you measure it, can outweigh the cost of licensing a platform that you purchase. There's a long time to market because you have to go through all of those steps for each component. And if components are upgraded or deprecated, you have to continue going through all of those steps. So the time it takes from you saying, I want to move data from my on-premise databases into my cloud data warehouse, or I want to move data from IoT on-premise into storage so I can do machine learning. The time it takes for you to go from thinking, I want to do that, to being able to do that, is as long as it takes you to build your framework and infrastructure, build your own SDI platform. Whereas if you're buying it, the time it takes is how long does it take to download it, which is much faster. So the time to a solution is massively reduced because you're not going through all the steps it takes to build it, which means that you're not focusing on building out business value. A lot of organizations out there are not software development companies. They're companies that have a different purpose. They're a bank, they're a finance organization, they are a healthcare organization. The business value that you can add depends on your industry, and focusing on providing value to the organization is massively increased if you're not spending huge amounts of time building something that someone else has already built. So focusing on business value enables you to build out these solutions really quickly and give value to your business much more quickly by utilizing a pre-built solution rather than building it yourself. Of course, I've mentioned that open source can become obsolescent. There are cases where people invested in open source technologies which people just stopped developing because it was no longer the hot new thing. And that investment meant that they now had to try and maintain it themselves and understand someone else's code in order to maintain the open source that they'd heavily invested in. That can definitely happen in the world of open source. If you are buying a streaming data integration solution from a vendor, then that vendor is going to support you. And it depends on a wide range of specialized skills. Each one of the pieces of open source requires a different skill set in order to understand it and work with it. It may be a different programming language, it may be a different environment that you need to set up. And there's also a meta skill required in understanding how all those components fit together, an architectural role that has to understand all the different APIs and all the different components and work out how to add all the enterprise grade features around all of them so that they all scale and are reliable and all work together. As opposed to if you're buying, the costs really are the license cost and limited visibility into the code, into the engine that makes it work. And depending on who you are, that may or may not be a big issue. As long as what you've built and the concepts around what you've built are transportable, then investing in streaming data integration is also transportable. The concepts are transportable. So what are the differences between build versus buy? Well, it's really, do you want to get going with building your solution and providing business value straight away? Or do you want to focus on being a software development organization that is building a platform that can then get you to building the applications that will provide business value?